Alright, what is up guys, it is Storm back here with another video, and in this one, I'm bringing you part 13 to the New Dawn Naruto/Boruto story. But before we begin, if you like the content that you're seeing, then be sure to subscribe, like, and comment. I mean, they're all free, so why not? If you want some dope channel merch, the link to that will be down in the description below, or you can just go to the store tab. If you want to see more of me, go check out my other channels and follow me on Twitter and Instagram, which will all be linked down below. But without further ado, why don't we just dive right on in. Boruto closed his eyes and sighed as he went through the motions once more. He felt the afternoon sun beating down upon him, and heard the birds chirp in their trees as they watched the intruder of their homes. He drew a vague swirl in the dirt of the forest floor to help him guide through the steps. Truthfully, he thought the taijutsu style of the Uzumaki clan was more of a dance than a fighting style. It certainly felt like it as he practiced. The scroll that Uzumaki had given him had detailed all the steps for the basic forms, instruct him to use the symbol of their village as a guide and to hum a tune in order to get the pacing right. If he performed it correctly, his form should vaguely resemble the whirlpools their country was named after. Fluid and flexible, yet powerful and unyielding. Boruto didn't need to learn it, of course, but he was interested. Gohaku's use of this style to deflect his gentle fist was an infuriating way to combat the style of taijutsu he had been accustomed to. While he would never use the Uzumaki style over the gentle fist, there was merit to incorporating the strongest stances and forms into the gentle fist to improve the style further. It didn't help that his own training in the gentle fist was woefully inadequate, on account of his fleeing of the leaf and his lack of Byakugan at an early age. His grandfather had taught both him and his sister, though Himawari had always received extra lessons since she had awakened their family's eyes. Boruto's ears twitched as he heard an almost imperceptible giggle. Opening his eyes, he found that Hikari had snuck up on him. Again. Not that Boruto was surprised. She was as silent as death itself most of the time. Her eyes betrayed no mirth, but there was no one else around to laugh at him. The sound was unnatural, coming from the girl whom Boruto had come to associate with nothing but the utmost rigid military discipline, which definitely did not include laughter. "What?" Boruto snapped. He had the distinct feeling that she was smirking under a mask. "Why are you dancing in the middle of the forest?" Hikari asked. Boruto felt the veins in his temples bulge. "I'm not dancing. This is the ancestral taijutsu style of the Uzumaki clan. It is not a dance," Boruto yelled. He was not dancing. The slight sparkle of mirth in Hikari's eyes told Boruto that she didn't believe him. "Lunch is served," she informed him. "It would benefit you to return to camp before the barbarians devour it all." Boruto scowled but let her previous comments slide. He knew all too well that it was first come first served when it came to food among the mercenaries. Reluctantly, he followed Hikari back through the small animal trail he had used to find a secluded space to practice. Along the way, Hikari would stop every so often, nailing and examining a flower, bush, or weed. Sometimes she would collect them, sometimes not. "What are you doing?" Boruto asked. Hikari revealed a small pouch in her waist that was bulging with various plants. "Collecting ingredients," she said, placing a herb in the pouch. "This island has many herbs and flowers that are useful for poisons and their antidotes." "Ah," Boruto commented. It was a little scary how much Hikari knew about poisons and anatomy. He recalled an incident with one of the thugs in which she had incapacitated him by applying pressure to a handful of nerves. The man still walked with a limp in his gait 2 weeks later. When he challenged her authority the second time, she had slipped something in his food that prevented him from controlling his bowels. He died when he defecated in another mercenary's sleeping bag, who killed him in his anger. "Don't worry," Hikari said, her tone almost playful. "I won't poison you. Unless you do something stupid, that is." Boruto gave her a weak smile. It was of little assurance. Personally, he hoped that the cook, an older gray-haired man who only had one leg, would prevent her from poisoning him. Boruto had quickly befriended the man after joining. The cook was an old sailor who served in the Water Lord's personal armada, transporting the Lord and his family between the islands. He was a veritable library of stories, which Boruto listened to in order to pass the time on the ship. The old man was happy for that company, complaining that the young never respected the elders these days. Hikari suddenly kneeled, running her fingers through a small flowering plant. It was a shade of dark violet, reminding Boruto vaguely of the Byakugan, shaped like a bell. "Aconite," Hikari said, as she grasped the plant by the base and pulled it up. She withdrew a kunai, cutting off the roots. When ingested, it causes numbing of the nerves and weakness in the limbs. Eventually, it leads to a rapid and irregular heartbeat. and decreased blood pressure. If the antidote isn't taken, the victim dies of heart failure. Boruto wore a false smile and nodded his head in some small measure of acknowledgement and understanding. As Hikari stood, Boruto could tell she was amused by his discomfort. The two of them followed the animal trail back into the clearing in which they had made camp. Tents were erected around roaring campfires, the largest of which had a metal pot that the old cook loomed over, stirring slowly. The Crimson Tide mercenaries stood in an orderly line holding bowls, waiting for the cook to give them their rations. Boruto laughed under his breath as some of the new recruits, common thugs, unable to use chakra, pushed their way to the head of the line and demanded to be served by that cook. The old man whipped a ladle across the first man's face, knocking him out. He exhaled fire, burning his two friends. If there was one thing Boruto had learned, it was that you didn't anger the person who prepared your food. That was a recipe for disaster. From the slight rise and fall of Hikari's shoulders, you could tell she found their misfortune to be amusing too. The two men burning rolled around on the ground, extinguishing the flames. They quickly grabbed their unconscious leader and retreated to their tent. Boruto doubted they would get food for a week, unless they foraged it for themselves. The cook raised his hand, waving Hikari over as the two entered the camp. Perks of being a ranking officer. You eat first. Boruto separated, heading for the end of the line. With a sigh, he realized it would be a long wait. Boruto gaggled as his shirt's collar was tugged from behind. Hikari beckoned for him to follow her. He followed her to the front of the line, where the cook served them happily with a toothy smile. Boruto tried to make himself invisible as the mercenaries in line scowled at him for their preferential treatment. Thankfully, they kept their mouths wisely shut. Why does the girl and her boyfriend get to eat first, huh? Or not? Boruto turned and watched as the wiser, older mercenaries parted, exposing the man who had made the comment. He looked around as if surprised at the sudden lack of friends. He opened his mouth to say something. Probably something that would get him killed, Boruto guessed, only to scream in pain as a throwing needle pierced his kneecap. The mercenary fell to the ground, holding his injured knee and wailing. The line reformed, stepping over the wounded man. No one offered him help. Hikari was already making her way to a small campfire near the edge of the camp. The man and woman who had been chatting around the fire quickly made themselves scarce as she approached. With great reluctance, Boruto followed and quietly sat opposite of her. He hoped she didn't mind. The soup was good, at least. Boruto looked over the rim of his bowl at Hikari as she half removed her mask, allowing just her lips and chin to be exposed. It was a bit of a game the two of them played. She was always reluctant to remove her mask, and Boruto was curious about what she looked like. After his first few weeks, it had become apparent to Boruto that Hikari never removed her mask. Not to train, not to eat. He wasn't daring enough to see if she slept with it, as he was sure being caught would entail his certain death. But if he had to bet, he would bet she slept with it too. All he had learned over the long 4 months was that she was pale with a sculpted chin and thin red lips. Finishing their meals, Boruto and Hikari sat in silence, staring into the campfire. They weren't quite friends, Boruto would say, but they were each other's closest acquaintances within the ranks of the Crimson Tide, barring her relationship with Eiji, which Boruto still wasn't entirely sure what that exactly was. The awkwardness was unbearable. Without food to occupy Boruto's thoughts, the mercenary's words hung in the air. The longer he sat, the more uncomfortable he felt, desperate to talk about something. Anything. Boruto asked the first question in his mind. How'd you get so good with your throwing needles? Hikari peered at him through the slits of her mask, and Boruto felt immediately less intelligent for having spoken. He was surprised, then, when Hikari actually deigned to answer him. I've always been good with throwing needles, she said. Even in the academy. When I was 8, I was recruited into the Anbu. My chosen weapon became throwing needles, as many operatives specialized in. They were useful in many applications where kunai and shuriken are not. Boruto nodded, a little surprised that she had answered him and revealed so much. It was impressive to be recruited into the Anbu at all, let alone at the tender age of 8. That made her a genius in Boruto's mind, maybe even a prodigy. Hikari tilted her head. Would you like to learn? Hikari asked, holding out a fistful of throwing needles. Boruto looked at the tips of the needles intently. They're not poisoned, she assured him. Good. Boruto didn't want his first experience with a weapon to end with him being poisoned, and hoping that Hikari had the antidote on her person. Gingerly, Boruto took the proffered needles. Hikari gestured to a tree near their edge of camp. Boruto didn't need more instruction than that. He stood, cocked back his arm, and hurled the first needle forward. It traveled about 2 feet away before it sunk into the ground. Boruto heard a slight nasally exhale over the crackle of the campfire. His cheeks burned as he pocketed the needle. "It's more of a slinging motion than a throwing one," Hikari said, taking pity on him. This time, the needle soared off into the forest. "Better," she commented. Boruto slung, not threw, the next several needles. The more he practiced, the closer they got to hitting the tree. Boruto held his breath as he held the last needle between index and middle finger. Ever so carefully, he hurled the needle forward. He was rewarded with the satisfying thunk as steel met wood. "Not bad," Hikari said. "For an academy student. Go find my needles." Boruto swore under his breath as he tore the needle from the tree and moved to walk through the bushes. Night had begun to fall and soon it would be dark, and finding the needles would be impossible. He was spared from his task as a mercenary sprinted up to them. "Lieutenant," he said, saluting her. "You and Boruto are wanted by AG in the command tent." Hikari sighed, gesturing for Boruto to follow her. Boruto thanked whatever deity was looking out for him. The command tent was the largest tent in their small encampment, home to a large table with maps, bingo books, and wanted posters spread all over it. AG loomed over the table, plotting out their company's next course of action. Takeo and Hiroki stood at attention to AG's left. They were both battered and bloodied. "What happened to you two idiots?" Hikari drawled, storming into the tent as she swatted the flap open. Boruto had to bite his tongue in order to not laugh as both men's cheeks turned scarlet. "These two idiots," AG spat the word, meaning every bit of it, managed to not only lose their bounty, but also get caught in a skirmish fighting in her home village. Hikari's gaze bored into Takeo and Hiroki. Both men straightened and looked ahead resolutely, refusing to meet her gaze. "And how did this happen?" Hikari asked, fearing the answer. AG frowned thunderously. Dumb and Dumber thought the girl was actually interested in them. She caught them with their pants down and escaped in the night, he explained. Boruto snorted as Takeo and Hiroki's faces turned as red as the Uzumaki clan's hair. Hikari sighed deeply. "I suppose Boruto and I are on damage control," she asked. AG nodded, handing her a flyer. Boruto peered over Hikari's shoulder to read the wanted poster. Tamako, female, 5'6", weighing between 110 and 130 pounds. No distinguishing characteristics, user of wind release. Jonin of Nadeshiko village. 2 million Ryo alive, 1 million dead, AG explained for them. What she wanted for, Boruto pipped up. If someone earned a bounty of 1 million Ryo or higher, they weren't small fry. AG smirked. "Our girl has quite the love for priceless shiny things, and isn't afraid to borrow them," he said. A thief, Boruto thought. "We'll depart in the morning," Hikari informed their leader. AG just nodded and waved them out. "Take these two with you. Make them do dishes for a month," he said. Boruto felt genuinely bad for Takeo and Hiroki. There were a lot of dishes left over after each meal. The Crimson Tide wasn't a large organization by any definition, but it was still a sizable number of people. Boruto followed Hikari as she herded the two men towards a small stream at the far side of their camp. They lumbered forward with a massive tub of bowls, spoon, and cups held between them. The dishes clanged loudly as Takeo dropped his half of the tub and waded in the water. "Wait," Hiroki hissed. "Be quiet." Boruto turned to poke fun at Hiroki, but the words died down in his throat at the serious look on the man's face as he peered over the creek and into the shadows of the forest. Hiroki straightened suddenly, his eyes wielding in alarm. "Anbu," he yelled, before the hiss of metal cut him off. He dropped to the floor. A kunai lodged in his throat. Boruto heard Takeo roar and sloshed forward through the stream as his Byakugan flared to life. "Anbu, we're under attack!" Hikari shouted. Men barreled from their tents, weapons in their hands. A shadow leapt at Boruto from a branch above him. With his eyes, he dodged the attack without looking up. He could tell the man was surprised as he shoved his palm into his sternum. The Anbu's eyes widened comically behind his mask as Boruto showered him with gentle fist strikes, leaving him boneless on the river bank. Hikari was dealing with two masked Anbu a short distance away while Takeo brutally slammed another skull into a rock in the stream, cracking it like an egg. Boruto withdrew two shuriken and sent one flying into the forest. He unleashed a second one a moment later, chasing its twin. The second collided with the first, causing it to swerve and strike one of the Anbu that Hikari was fighting from behind. She capitalized on the man's pain as her hands glowed blue with chakra. A quick swipe and her chakra scalpel slit the man's throat from ear to ear. Boruto saw Takeo grappling with three more masked Anbu in the stream. He had several shuriken embedded in his back, staining his shirt with blood. Boruto flashed for the hand seals. The stream rose up from its bed, forming a massive raging dragon of water. The dragon descended upon the Anbu, swallowing them whole and keeping them submerged. One of them weaved seals, and the dragon exploded into rain as it was dispersed. By that time, Takeo had recovered. and his anger fueled his attacks. Boruto heard a roar as the rogue unleashed an arcing wave of lightning that caught the Anbu as they fell, electrocuting them. Takeo whirled around, looking for his next enemy. "There's no more here," Boruto shouted. Running past Hikari, she dispatched her last opponent, with a well-placed throwing needle that pierced the Anbu's eye through the slit in his mask. "They're attacking the camp." Boruto, Hikari, and Takeo sprinted back towards the camp, where all hell had broken loose. Anbu had descended upon them in droves, killing scores of mercenaries who were normal men and women that couldn't use chakra. The survivors were grouped together around the few ninja the Crimson Tide employed. Among them, Eiji was sending out bolts of lightning to keep their attackers at bay. Hikari threw a hail of throwing needles at their masked assailants as Takeo charged them like a bull. Boruto weaved a series of hand seals and sent a stream of water gushing from his lips that picked up an Anbu and flung him into the forest. As he passed overhead, a common bandit raised his sword and slashed the man's belly open. The Anbu turned to face the new threat, realizing that their comrades had failed the ambush. The veins in Boruto's Byakugan bulged as his eyes focused on every opponent at once. The first Anbu, a woman, whose mask resembled a rabbit, was incapacitated with a few well-placed gentle fist strikes. The second never managed to reach him as Takeo picked the man up by the waist, hoisting him high and slamming him into the earth with as much strength as he could muster. Boruto heard every bone in the man's body shatter. The taijutsu style of the Land of Lightning shone through, brutal as it was. Boruto let Hikari and Takeo take the front lines, elegant assassin and brutal brawler clearing the path. He withdrew a handful of shuriken in both hands and let them fly. Most missed their mark, but several found their way into the backs of the Anbu fighting Eiji and his allies. Eiji capitalized on each shuriken, dispatching or crippling each opponent with startling efficiency. In a matter of moments, the small force of Anbu had dwindled down to only 3 men. Their leader, Boruto presumed, was a tall, lean man with a head of blonde hair that wore a bull mask. "See," Boruto heard one of the other survivors whisper, apparently addressing their leader. The Anbu with the bull mask nodded once and his hands were forming a seal before anyone could react. The man glowed with a blinding white light. All at once, the remaining Crimson Tide hurled whatever weapons they had at the Anbu. The light died, revealing 3 dead men. Eiji marched up to the nearest body and kicked the mask off, revealing a hidden cloud headband. He scoffed and turned to face his company. "Check for survivors. Ours and theirs. Note any who have a bounty on their head," he commanded. The Crimson Tide limped away, going through the motions of checking the dead. Eiji began to walk away when Boruto caught a flicker of movement with his Byakugan. The Anbu with the bull mask stirred, and the shuriken embedded in him faded to nothing. Genjutsu, Boruto realized. The Anbu sprinted forward, a short sword in his hand, intending to impale Eiji from behind. Boruto's body moved with a speed he didn't know he had. His right hand sent a lance of chakra from his fingertips that disabled the man's wrist and sent the sword flying, and his left reached up and buried itself in his chest. The Anbu fell backwards, hacking up blood and clutching at his heart. After a few seconds, he dropped to the ground and did not rise. Boruto dropped to his knees and vomited. His stomach emptied out of its contents. He began to cough and retch as the realization had dawned on him. He had just killed the man. With his Byakugan, he could see Hikari looming over him in his moment of weakness, ensuring no other Anbu took advantage of the lull in combat. Takeo caught the other 2 Anbu, killing them before they could escape using their leader's genjutsu. Eiji kneeled next to Boruto, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Don't lose sleep over this scum, kid. Everyone has to make their first kill at some point. Better it be this guy than some no-name your village orders you to off," Eiji said. It did little to change the feelings of disgust and guilt Boruto felt welling up inside of him. Eiji cleared his throat, patting Boruto on the back in an attempt to get his breathing under control. "You saved my life, kid," he said, "and I pay my debts. Anything you want. Name it, and it's yours. You can be a free man if you want." Boruto wiped at his eyes, determined not to let anyone see him cry as his Byakugan faded. He really didn't have anywhere to go, and he wasn't ready to go home and face his parents just yet. Doing his best to ignore the dead man at his feet, there was one thing that Boruto wanted. He had only seen it once, ever so briefly, but he wanted it all the same. Lightning armor. Boruto managed to gasp out. "Teach me how to use the lightning armor." Eiji's slight frown turned into a toothy smirk. "You got it, kid," he said, patting him on the back and pulling Boruto to his feet. He managed to spin Boruto away from the body of the Anbu before he could look at it. Eiji passed him off to Hikari, giving her a single nod. "Get some rest. When you get back from your mission, you start training," he instructed Boruto. Boruto nodded feebly and felt a small prick on his neck. He looked over to see Hikari withdrawing a needle. He only had a second to gasp and complain before he fell unconscious. It'll wear off in 10 to 12 hours. You'll thank me later, Hikari assured Boruto's sleeping form, as she dragged him to his tent.